Thank you, everyone. That was totally awesome. All the talks were fantastic. I want to thank all of the speakers and all of you that came. It was a great day. I had tons of fun. I hope you did. Just a few quick things. So I already said thank you, so I'll say thank you again. Big thanks to our sponsors. I apologize to those sponsors that I harassed quite a bit to get money, but thank you very much. So yeah, can we get a round of applause for the sponsors? At this point, just real quick, this is the same slide that I put up last year, and I think I talked about this during my opening. But we need lots of help from a project perspective. We need help beyond just code changes. We need help with documentation. I have many conversations with people, where they'll say, "Oh, I read the documentation and it was a little confusing, and thank you for answering my question." Super appreciate PRs that just fix the documentation, or even if there's something simple, like if you wish the documentation had a ref link to some other part of the documentation. It's a great way to get involved in the project. It's really appreciated. So if you're looking for ways of helping, documentation is a great one. We're always looking for blogs. We can host those on the Envoy proxy blog, or happy to link to your company's blog. So blogging, again, is a great way, and these can be user stories. They can be about features. They can be just about anything. Also, always love help with examples. We have an increasing number of sandboxes in the project, and those are great ways of helping people learn. So thank you for those. And again, always opening issues with questions is always super helpful, for us to understand what's going on. And as I was saying before, we are looking for maintainers, and that does not necessarily require, a deep knowledge of C++ networking. As I was saying before, I think over the next year, we're going to be increasingly looking at having different types of maintainer roles, and probably having maintainers just either work on different subsystems or handle different parts of the project. So if that is appealing to you, or if your employer is looking to help you have some time, for doing open source work, we again really appreciate it. So at the current time, I know that there's just us in between you and some drinks back there or something else, but I was just gonna bring up the maintainers who are here, and we can do a brief Q&A if there's questions that people had. So if you're here in the audience, maintainers would love to have you come up on stage. So we have myself, we have Alyssa, Harvey, Stefan, Lizen, Snow, and then we have Dee, Jose, Josh, and I think Dan is not present. So thank you so much for coming. And like I said, we can answer any questions that people had. Also, if there are questions for some of the presenters who presented during the conference, you did not have time for Q&A, you can also ask questions, and assuming the people are still here, we'll grab them and have them come up. So, so thank you, everyone. And so can I also get a big round of applause for all of the maintainers? I would literally be dead right now if it were not for all of them. So thank you. So are there any questions? I'm happy to run the mic around. And if there aren't questions, that's fine too. Not many questions today. The question is, what is the deal with the Envoy filter repo? Anyone want to take that one? Okay. This is a great example of a case in which we could use some help. There's a couple of known problems there. We have some sequencing issues of changes between the Envoy repo and the Envoy filter repo. So without getting into a huge argument about monorepos, there are some issues there. But so we would like there to be more examples in. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I think the long-term fix there is, and part of the problem is because it's a separate repo, as Matt points out, we have this sort of like a consistency issue. Now, we had the same issue with APIs as well. I think ideally what we would do is we would have the canonical version of the Envoy filter example live in the main Envoy repo, and we would push this automatically on every commit essentially, which modifies that out to a separate repo, because it is ideal that it is a separate repo because it's designed to show you as a consuming project what you can do with Envoy. So that's the goal, and I think there's even an issue tracking that, but there is nobody who's signed up for that work right now.
Yes, sorry, I had forgotten that is the plan. But yeah, but it's a great example of something where if you're looking to come in and help, that would be extremely valuable for the larger community, and it doesn't require any C++ knowledge. I mean, it's a bunch of GitHub and CI and some bash scripts, but that would be super helpful. Sure. Question is WebAssembly and Envoy.
Yeah, there's like another repo called Envoy WASM, and the WebAssembly filter is living there currently. The target is upstream that in next couple, per 1 or 2 release in the mainstream Envoy repo. It's still proxy is built based on that and already have some WASM filter available, so you can try out there if you want. That's the current status.
Question is, update on Incremental XDS.
Yeah, so Incremental XDS really actually has multiple components. There's Delta XDS, which is basically just reducing the amount you need to ship on the wire, which is good for both network and compute reasons, as we saw earlier today. And that more or less works right now. There's the only thing missing there, I believe, and there's a few rollbacks and roll forwards going on around it, is around ADS. But generally speaking, that's available and it's supported. On-demand XDS, which is where you lazily load configuration, really we're approaching this XDS by XDS, and the actively worked on one right now is this has to do with VHDS, and that's actually also coming pretty close to landing, but is not yet in a stable state. So that's pretty much where we are there. I would recommend anyone interested in Incremental XDS to start onboarding onto Delta XDS, and then you can think about the other forms of Incremental XDS as they land further down.
Yeah, I was actually going to say one other thing. Again, just you'll see me keep coming back to this theme of things that you can do to help that don't require C++ knowledge is it's become clear, particularly around the XDS side of things, that if we had better integration tests, it would be very helpful. So we recently merged a large patch, and we've since had to revert it, I think, twice now. And that's just a very strong indication that XDS has become, for better or worse, a very complicated system. So it would be great to have, again, more integration tests in the repo, whether those were built against Go control plane or some other control plane. So that's just another area where if you are interested in coming in and helping out with testing infrastructure, I think there's probably some pretty low-hanging fruit of bringing up a Envoy binary and a fake control plane and doing various permutations and making sure that Envoy works correctly. If you're into that kind of thing, very, very helpful. Question is there a risk that the UDPA becomes a lowest common denominator API? I assume you're talking about something like Kubernetes ingress or something along those lines. Do you want to give your thoughts?
I'll give my 2 cents. Maybe you can give yours. Yeah, I mean, there's always a tension between, being feature-rich and being able to support everything that Envoy does and being, fully generic. Our goal really will be to have UDPA always be sort of pluggable. There will be a generic component, and there will be the per proxy or load balancer components, and we'll ideally be able to fill them in. Now, because we're evolving UDPA, this is not like a clean room design, which is being designed by committee. We're basically taking, when we made this very clear to everyone involved in UDPA, is we're starting with the Envoy APIs, which are a known quantity. They work, they meet all the needs of Envoy. And we're going to slowly de-Envoyfy them, but we're not going to, with that criteria, they're always going to have to support the entire set of functionality that Envoy does. So I'm not too concerned about that, but it may end up being the case that large parts of the API need to be proxy specific. We'll see. We're spending a lot of time thinking about things. So far, the transport protocol seems pretty generic, and I feel that is that's a place where we can be very successful. Routing is another area we've looked at and trying to generalize Envoy's routing to be very generic and perhaps work across other kinds of L7 concerns like thrift. I feel that's a place where we can get some solid wins. Other parts might be harder.
Yeah, I think my feeling is there is risk, and unfortunately, there's no. I mean, yeah, there's no black and white situation here. I think there are a lot of politics here. There are a lot of benefits of doing this work. So I think the politics are probably worth it from an industry perspective. But per what Harvey was saying, I think we're going to have to be nimble and stay flexible and see what happens. I can only speak for myself in saying that I believe in a strong balance of being pragmatic and making sure that we move things forward and don't just devolve into 2 or 3 years of discussions about an API that doesn't make sense for everyone.
What is Envoy team's commitment behind Envoy Mobile?
Sorry, say it again.
How much is the Envoy team committed to support Envoy Mobile?
The question is, how much is the Envoy team committed to Envoy Mobile?
Yeah, so right now the project is hosted under Lyft, and that is deliberate in the sense that we wanted to start with the flexibility to really integrate with the Lyft app and work for Lyft concerns, but with the vision that we want a strong partnership with the Envoy community. And as hopefully the project gets more traction and more use cases, then we can move back into the Envoy ecosystem. I don't know if you.
No, yeah, that's a perfect answer. I think the reality of what we've seen is that it's pretty much the same code. So like there's not much that is specific to Envoy Mobile. Yes, there will be increasingly more code. I think that we're very close to having it be the production networking path in the Lyft app, and there are quite a few other companies I think that are pretty interested. But even if it were just in use in the Lyft app, I think the chance of it being abandoned is quite low. So would I say that there's guaranteed upkeep right now? No. If we get it rolled out to production in the first half of next year, I think the chance of it going away is almost zero.
Can I ask, explain what's happening underneath if I want to change listener's IP address? Why can't I simply change it? Yes? Maybe I'm wrong.
Sorry, question is, if you change the listener IP address, do you mean like if you change the IP address in the listener config? I think that should work. Oh. Can you open an issue? No, I think I don't recall off the top of my head. I think that it's keyed on name, and there's some reason why that was done, and I don't remember. So sorry. We'd have to look at the code. Yeah, unless some. I wrote that code, and I'm sure I did it for a reason, but I don't remember why. And maybe it's not a good reason anymore. I don't know.
Talk a little about the XDS API.
Sure. Question is, should we be worried about the V3 API in terms of migrations?
Yeah, so, I mean, as I mentioned during my talk, V3 is going to not be too exciting, right? It's not really going to have anything new. It's really just going to be a deprecation of various fields in V2 and a chance for us to get our process in place. I feel probably I would, we're intending to land at end of year. I would give it a few weeks maybe, just make sure there are no rollbacks and everyone's pretty happy with it, and wait for folks to pick it up. But certainly by end of year, next year you're going to have to move over. I would, I'm not one of these people who's like necessarily a super early adopter on anything. So I would recommend that you, probably. If it was me, I would let someone else probably be that first adopter, to be honest. But I feel we certainly are we're strongly committed to having V3 be a stable and robust API. And I would say probably within, let's say, by the midway through the first quarter, we should have a pretty good signal of whether or not everything landed as it was expected to land.
Yeah, I was saying there's just one small thing that I would add, which is that there's one piece of policy that we haven't finalized yet, and that policy is there's going to be some period of time once we snap V3 that we are going to allow small features, and again, I'm really waving my hands here, to be added to the V2 API. So it won't be completely frozen, probably, again, like for, I don't know if it's 1 quarter or some number of weeks or something like that, mainly because it's pretty terrible experience if we tell consumers that, to have access to one field, you have to migrate your entire API. With that said, we have to eventually encourage people to migrate. So there'll be some grace period by which we will not backport every feature, but at the discretion of the person who's developing it, they'll be given some period of time at which we'll let them put that field, non-breaking obviously, into V2. But then after some date, we'll just block it. But that policy has to be worked on. So if you have thoughts on that, that would be helpful.
You talked about documentation, so do you have any plans to write a book about Envoy? Talk about its history, the decisions you made, evolution, the pros and cons, and if you are going to do it again, how could it be different?
Will you be my ghostwriter? The question is, are we going to write a book on Envoy? I think I talked to Harvey at one point about writing a book or something like that. I think on Envoy's 5-year anniversary, I was thinking about writing a Medium post on this topic. But I don't know. Maybe I'm not. I don't. Yeah. Sorry. No plans. Sure. Question is how does the current security process work?
Okay, I'll take it. Sorry. Okay, so there's actually, there's a dedicated Envoy security team in open source. It's actually mostly the maintainers now. It's really essentially a subset of them. There's also a team at Google which is also heavily contributing to this process, and We discover there's probably 3 different ways we're discovering most of these security vulnerabilities. Some of these are, probably 4 actually. Some of these are reported to us via our private disclosure email lists, and and that's great, they're under embargo. Some are discovered by fuzzing. We have an extensive investment in fuzzing infrastructure, and Azra, who's here, is actually leading some of our work there. We have, what else do we have? We have like basically just manual code inspection, like Alyssa's found a ton of these bugs. You want to say anything about that?
I mean, basically every time we get a report or find something in fuzzing, we end up doing analysis kind of that surrounding area of code. And there's best practices in terms of like, smuggling and line breaks and data, extra data injection and whatnot that we tend to think about when we find an area that could use some firming up.
And so the final one is actually, these are like the 0-day disclosures where people post bug reports, which actually turn out to be potential security issues and DOSes. So what I would encourage everyone here to do is when you're filing an issue in a GitHub tracker, whether Envoy or Istio or any other open source project, please think carefully about whether if that particular bug was used by someone malicious, for example, let's just say it's a crash. Could it be turned into a DOS vector? If so, please reach out to the security teams of the respective open source projects, because we're more than happy to work with you and do the triage work and help you make that assessment. And we're very responsive. We typically get back to you within 24 hours, and we're very interested in taking any of these incoming issues.
Yeah, I would say one more point to that. Again, when we get emails to the Envoy security list, I'd say, maybe half of them we decide don't merit CVE, but we'd much, much rather have you err on the side of caution and tell us, hey, there's something crashing. I'm not sure if it's my filter or if it's actually exploitable in Envoy. We will look into it for you. We will help you debug it. It's much, much better for everyone involved than having a 0-day posted on GitHub where you basically can't delete it.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is we are starting to think again about our general process around how many stable releases, how many releases should we support. The thing that I would add here is that yes, we're all paid by companies, but from a security perspective, we have different focus areas. We work on different products and we use Envoy in different ways and we care about different things. And the reason that I bring that up is that we simply do not have the resources to treat every line of code in the Envoy code base with the same rigor and the same response as certain other areas. So we've been increasingly working on better definitions of threat models and processes of like which areas of the code base receive tier 0 support and tier 1 and so on. And I think increasingly moving forward, we're going to be getting more and more rigorous about this piece of code or this extension is not supported for full-on CVE handling. And if there are companies that care about that, we are going to need volunteers to join the security team and own the security response for those extensions. And that's also why increasingly you're going to see us try very hard to push more and more things into extensions, because for people that have more stringent security postures where they want to compile out code that they're not depending on, it allows us to have a trusted computing base that is much easier to understand. So I think those are, like I was saying during my opening talk, those are changes that I think that you're going to see in 2020 as we start to apply a little more rigor to how we're doing releases and what code gets certain treatments and so on. Does anyone have anything to add? More question? Yep. 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 So the question is, are we going to, are we going to support more stable releases? I think, and that's actually what I was saying before. Is that there is a proposal right now that's floating around. It's driven by the Istio community, but we think that there's other people that will be interested. We are very likely going to support multiple stable releases. So we will have stable release maintainers, and we are going to have some policy of, don't quote me on this, I'm not going to guarantee it, but I think it is likely that we will start doing CVE fixes for the 2 most recent releases. So that will give people 3 months to update Envoy, which we think is generally reasonable. We may also do security patches for more stable releases. Like, I think it is possible that we are going to have a year's worth of stable releases. What I don't know, and I don't think any of us can commit to, is that, again, this is the kind of thing where we do not have enough time to do stable release management for 4 different releases. So we're looking for stable release maintainers and a bunch of other stuff. So these are, again, things where they don't require deep C++ knowledge, but if you want to really help the community and help with cherry picking and stuff like that and doing release management, these are things that the community would really appreciate. Does anyone want to add anything? Oh, yes. The carrot of which we're also thinking about doing some of these things is that the way that you get on the early security release list right now is we have a set of requirements which basically say that you cannot be an end user. You must be a distributor of Envoy. So you have to be a package maintainer, or you have to be running Envoy as a service, be it publicly named. This is done because it's mostly in line with what other similar open source projects do, because if we let all end users on the list, well, then we start having arguments over how big do you have to be and blah, 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 blah. It's not a very reasonable thing. With that said, we are thinking about a change in policy. We're at the discretion of the security team. If you are a large enough end user and you are willing to help us test risky changes and test security fixes, we will let you on the list. So what it means to be large is TBD and likely at the discretion of us. But if that's a thing that interests you, please let us know. But that would mean that you would get access to security patches 2 weeks in advance of everyone else knowing and be able to pre-patch without it being a giant fire drill. The question is, can you use Envoy as a forward proxy?
You wrote it. Oh.
Yes. Yes, you can. Sorry, I can't hear you. Can you speak a lot louder?
And then I don't know the answer to this, but this is the question. The question, I think, is if you have a forward proxy scenario and there's an intermediate proxy in between, I guess, the forward proxy and the users, and it's HTTPS, that doesn't work? Is that the question?
I think it should work. I'm not sure. I would recommend opening an issue with more details. Question is, what does the future hold? I don't know. How about everyone can go?
Okay, I'll start. Okay, things I know offhand that we're working on, there's a bunch of work, again, on security, largely run by Harvey's team in terms of fuzzing, but also looking into kind of refactoring some of the core components in Envoy to pull as much code out of the core libraries as possible to kind of decrease that attack and bug surface. Obviously, there's a lot of work being done on quick integration. The Google Quick team is working on integrating kind of server-side quick support, so Envoy being able to terminate quick from client. And then the Envoy mobile team is going to work on taking the 80% of that work and then doing the last really hard 20% for client-side kind of happy eyeballs, does quick work, if not fail over to TCP, caching credentials and all that jazz, so that hopefully by the end of next year, you can actually deploy Envoy client-side, server-side, and have end-to-end, quick if you care to use that. And we'll pass this on. Who else wants to talk about things?
Okay. Now that I've had a second to think. So actually somebody asked me about this earlier, and I think it's a really good idea. We don't have any specific plans, but it would be great to get some integrated into the continuous integration testing, some performance testing for the proxy, so that we can understand the trend over time of how it's performing and under various scenarios. Again, I'll call out, if anybody wants to help with that, we would love to talk to you.
UDPA.
I'm working on a couple small things right now. The JSON access log output actually not being all strings all the time, like numbers as numbers. And I think I need to look at using URL query parameters for consistent hashing as opposed to just headers. And I want to fart around with the memory allocator too, but we'll see if I get to that.
Couple more. I think over the next year, there's also going to be a lot of work put into Envoy at scale. So both handling massively scaled up numbers of configurations, handling multi-tenancy better, probably throughput improvements, just a lot, load testing, as Josh already mentioned, a lot more focus on it being kind of more robust, both from a security and a traffic standpoint. I think that there will also probably, hopefully over the next year, but if not, maybe a little out, more latency improvements, right? Prefetching connections was mentioned at one of the talks. That's something that we would really like to do, but it comes after performance and scale. So yeah, like more intentional prefetching anywhere we can cut off latency, caching credentials, et cetera, would be really kind of awesome.
Yeah, so what I see happening is more flexible load balancing. We're seeing that right now with the aggregate cluster that's about to land, which kind of allows you to do load balancing across multiple clusters at the same time. And I imagine that will just kind of keep increasing as people have more different requirements. And so yeah, hopefully load balancing will be more configurable, extensible in general, and kind of making it easier for people to do exactly what they want to do in terms of load balancing and failover and all of that.
WebAssembly and ECL integration is most of my focus in next couple of quarters. Yeah, that's pretty most things.
Better builds.
Well, in the last year, we changed up build infrastructure quite a lot, and now it is more faster now, and I probably more focused. We'll still focus on that, bring more CI stuff as well, and probably have a better developer experience from that.
Since I work the same company with Lizan, so mostly we will do the same. We work mostly on how making it still better in terms of integration with Envoy, and bringing probably more examples on WebAssembly. So we for information that currently the WebAssembly filter inside Istio repo is using VM null. So basically it's C++, but using the WebAssembly API. It's not basically not WebAssembly as a WebAssembly, but it's C++ code statically linked into that proxy, and that probably in the tracing capabilities. Currently, the Zipkin code base is not in this good shape, so yeah, probably that will be getting better for that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add things to that. So I think so something that came up, and that comes up a lot, is that we don't have a lot of internal API stability within Envoy, right? So we're constantly, we add a new field, a new method to the filter API, and things break. And we've often debated over the years whether or not we should sit down and brainstorm and come up with this great Uber API, which would be super stable and everyone will write to, and that's just a lot of work and nobody's taken that on. But I feel that we're actually likely to, just following on that point about WebAssembly and the null VM, land up with a de facto stable API. WebAssembly requires a stable API to make it work at all as a proposition, right? A WebAssembly extension, when written, should be able to run on basically any Envoy. At least in a backward compatible way. And so what this means is, as long as you write even C++ filters to that WebAssembly API, you can probably compile them, and you will be able to, using what's called the null VM, down to just regular Envoy static filters, and they'll still have the same stability guarantees as WebAssembly code. So I feel WebAssembly is going to be transformational, not just because of the WebAssembly aspect, but because of the stable API.
Yeah, that's actually, I see that probably it's a possible way to provide the API stability over our like C++ API interface, and that actually could probably possibly make the like dynamic native code linked extensions as well.
I guess my answer is Envoy everywhere. And that's not only about the work that we're doing with Envoy Mobile, but actually related to this is some of the work that we want to upstream is, like we were presenting earlier, the API listener that will allow, for example, other libraries to inject directly into Envoy as an engine.
I think my main interest over 2020 generally is around making Envoy simpler to use. So we have a lot of people at Lyft who are working on generally reducing common configurations. So things like adaptive concurrency, adaptive timeouts, things like that. There's a lot of ideas that we've talked about around how to have people have better configuration defaults. So we talked about introducing configuration profiles. So for example, you would start up Envoy with --perf, --edge, --service mesh, and that would preset a bunch of things like timeouts and overload manager and blah, 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 and then basically warn you if you're using configuration that we think is not safe. I guess on a personal level, I'll be honest, I'm tired. So my personal interest is I think it's clear at this point that like I said, I think we're in this for the long haul. So my interest is making sure that we continue to scale the number of maintainers, the number of contributors, the people that are helping to answer questions, and all of those things. So. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of other features, but those are the things that are top of mind.
One other thing I think is worth calling out is one of the unique things about the Envoy project, as Matt said, is that it's not owned by a specific company. So the Envoy roadmap is, as you've heard, is a collection of what various companies think they're working on right now. But any given team at any given company can get preempted by their actual day jobs at any point. And frequently, the Envoy roadmap gets driven by some other company coming in and being like, hey, I really want to use Envoy for X. And we sit down and have a couple design conversations and help shepherd them through that process. So a couple times a year, we get pulled by like CNCF or whatnot of like, what's the Envoy roadmap? And frankly, we don't really know. Like, we know what we plan on working on, but we don't know what you plan on working on, and there's more of you than there are of us. So I guess we'll just see.
Yeah, well, on that note, a bunch of us will be tomorrow on the show floor at KubeCon. There's an Envoy booth somewhere in the CNCF area. A bunch of us will be there from around noon to like 2:30 or 2:20 to 12:20 to 2:20 or something. Anyway, we'll be there. Go out. I think there's some snacks and drinks out there. And thank you so much to everyone for coming. Thanks.